We have represented April for the better part of a decade, and we are very pleased to be currently presenting a small exhibition of her most recent work, A Long Ribbon of Strange Impressions. After transformational experiences of being embedded in scientific research projects in some of the most remote places on the planet and living through the isolation of the pandemic, as well as civil and political unrest this year, April has assumed the role of messenger. In her current exhibition, she focuses on the question of whether we can come together to solve the huge challenges that we face. April earned a BFA in glass from the Australian National University in Canberra in 2004. She also apprenticed with and was influenced by Czech glass engraver Jiří Hartzuba. I was going to say she was profoundly influenced, but I'm going to leave it up to April to tell us if that is true. Even though he may not be as well known to American glass audiences today, Hartzuba was not only a monumentally gifted and hardworking artist and maker. April and many remember him particularly fondly these days because he was also one of the most principled human beings, a dissident, and an open government critic. He had much to teach us, not only about art, but also about a life largely lived in a totalitarian regime. Recognition for April's work includes the 2010 New Talent Award from Urban Glass and a 2016 USA Ford Fellowship. She was one of 7 artists to receive that, the USA Fellowship, Artist Fellowship that year, along with Lauren Fensterstock and Roberto Lugo in the craft category. Her work has been the subject of 2 solo museum exhibitions at the Bellevue Arts Museum and at the Chrysler Museum of Art. And in 2020, it was featured at the Grand Rapids Art Museum as part of the exhibition, A New State of Matter, Contemporary Glass, an exhibition that was organized by the Boise Art Museum, where it opened in 2018. April Surgent's work is held in public and private collections in the United States, Australia, and Europe, including the Toledo Museum of Art, Toledo, Ohio, the Corning Museum of Glass, the Chrysler Museum of Art, and the Ulster Museum in Belfast, Northern Ireland. Welcome, April. Thank you for being here. And it is also my pleasure to introduce Nora Atkinson. Nora earned a bachelor's degree in 2002 and a master's degree in 2006 from the University of Washington in Seattle, and started her career as a curator at the Bellevue Arts Museum in 2006. She stayed there until 2014 when she joined the Renwick Gallery as the Lloyd Herman Curator of Craft. In 2019, she was appointed the Flair and Charles Bressler Curator in Charge at the Renwick Gallery, the first woman to hold that position. Since joining the museum in 2014, Atkinson has organized exhibitions that seem to give us a way to view the field of craft with a new and expanded lens, one put in place by Nora. Her most recent project, No Spectators, The Art of Burning Man, which opened in 2018, created a sensation and attracted record-breaking crowds, more than doubling the attendance at the Renwick that year to nearly 850,000 visitors. The exhibition brought cutting-edge artwork created at the annual Desert Gathering to the nation's capital for the first time. Since she has been at the Renwick in her new position, she has assembled an all-women curatorial team joined by Mary Savick and Anya Montiel. In 2018, she was named Washingtonian's Best Boundary Pushing Curator for her work on the critically acclaimed exhibitions No Spectators, The Art of Burning Man, and also the fantastic exhibition Murder is Her Hobby, Frances Glessner Lee and the Nutshell Studies of Unexplained Death, which opened in 2017.
Part of my practice, I use that term pretty fluidly. Research has meant anything from documenting my immediate surroundings to working in the field with scientists and helping them with their work. Regardless of kind of how informal or informal the work has been, I always tend to use photography, whether it's digital or analog, a lot of drawing and a whole lot of writing as a part of my practice to inform my work. I really enjoyed dividing my time up between the research and the making part. I feel like it gives me a little bit of on my toes and keeps me interested in what I'm doing. My work that most of you probably know me for is the engraved work, and it's what I'm doing is fusing layers of bullseye glass together, and then I'm doing a process called cameo engraving, and you can see in the two images there where I'm lifting a panel up to a machine that's called an engraving lathe, and I'm very slowly carving away the glass to make a low relief carving. I think of engraving a lot like drawing, but taking the paper to the pencil. So when I first started making work, I was living abroad in Australia. I did my undergrad there, and I became really interested in the inherent connection between person and place. I felt like as a foreigner, I was constantly introspectively questioning my identity, and I felt that place really informs who we are. However, and I ended up basing a lot of my earlier work on that ideology. But as I became increasingly concerned about climate change and the environmental crisis, I decided to flip my question, and instead of asking how place impacts us, I started asking how we impact place. The impetus for wanting to flip my question was really based on the ideology that knowledge is the greatest agent for change. I think for me anyways, climate change feels too big and too unattainable and too kind of out of control really to do anything about on an individual level. So I felt like by flipping my question, and by learning as much as I could about climate change, maybe through understanding it better, I could also understand how as an individual, I could start to make positive as opposed to negative environmental impact. So almost, but not quite over the last decade, I've devoted my research to climate change. As a result, I have collaborated with some amazing conservation and research scientists from all over the world, from Antarctica to Alaska to a remote atoll in the Pacific Ocean. The research that I've participated in has been incredibly varied, but it has always somehow been revolving around the ocean. And that part of it, for me, my love for the ocean came from growing up in the Pacific Northwest, really around the Salish Sea. So I don't see my artwork as an actual translation of the science that I've been kind of helping out with, but more as a connection of to nature through my experiences. I hope to connect people to places that maybe they have never been to, or to connect people to ideas that maybe they haven't thought of already. When in a time when everything is stored in clouds and digitized in ones and zeros, I really view my engravings as archival and tangible records of a changing era. I think that as an artist, I want to talk about these issues in my work because I think that especially when it comes to big ideas like climate change, where information is unapproachable and often overwhelming, art is has a unique ability to reach the public in a very kind of ephemeral way and connect in a way that can connect people. And so it also has the ability to reach people across all different social and political spectrums. So I love that about art, and I love talking about these issues with my art. So of course, as I've immersed myself in the field work, other than the ocean being a major theme, humans have been a pretty big theme. Our fingerprint has literally been found in every remote corner of the planet, from the most remote mountaintops to the deepest oceanic trenches and everywhere in between. At the same time, we are experiencing this incredible disconnect from nature, so much so that when presented with an image of the human figure, that we no longer even relate it to nature or having anything to do with the natural world at all. I think that this is a major challenge for climate change because humans have a tendency to not necessarily care about or connect to things that they aren't intimately familiar with or that they don't have a connection with. So with that in mind, I think one thing that's very evident is that the climate crisis is as much an environmental crisis as it is a social crisis. So as I was thinking about this social ecology philosophy mid last year, I happened to pick up this book, The Life of a Useless Man by Maxim Gorky. It's a story about a very young and naive figure during the Russian Revolution. He's kind of stuck in this society where people are unwilling and unable to find common ground. People are afraid of each other. They're afraid of the unknown. They're afraid of change. And as a society, they're completely divided. And reading this story, of course, amidst a pandemic, a social uprising, an election, and the ever-present climate crisis, I felt like even though the perils weren't directly the same, the nation of a fierce division certainly rang familiar. In a nod to the book, I used all of the titles are direct quotes from the book. And I wanted to make a small body of work that kind of showed my perspective on what 2020 could be. I think it was a remarkable year of change and transformation, and I wanted to discuss that with some work. One of the most remarkable things that I think happened with COVID, and of course I don't mean to diminish the absolutely devastating impact that COVID has had, especially on marginalized people, but when I'm thinking about silver linings, one thing that kind of caught me was that at the beginning of the pandemic, regardless of nationality, regardless of race, sex, gender, identity, socioeconomic status, we all simultaneously, 7.9 billion people experienced this incredible shift. You know, what happened after that, of course, is totally different. But what happened in that moment gave me hope that we could potentially work together to fight climate change. I mean, I honestly, before that moment, wasn't sure that humans could work together collectively. And here we are in this moment where what felt like a turn of a dime before COVID was politicized, people were actually starting to work together. And I thought that was an incredibly hopeful and amazing thing. So the shadowy figures in these pieces really represent a moment of hope, a moment of transition, and of extreme possibility. If 2020 was the year that changed us, perhaps 2021 will be the year that we transform. And because I love to end on a good quote, I leave you with Murray Bookchin, who's the father of social ecology. The assumption that what currently exists must necessarily exist is the acid that corrodes visionary thinking. And thank you. That's my portion.
Thank you so much. That was really great and a great quote, and wonderful to see your work, April.
Thanks for inviting me. I really was thrilled to do this Katja because you know, April and I go way back, and I was really excited to be able to have a conversation with her. I've been hoping to get her to Renwick for quite a long time. But also when you opened up the platform and let me know that April was going to be presenting for a few minutes and then I was going to be invited to present on a project, I instantly thought of the exhibition that we have on view right now, which is called Forces of Nature, the Renwick Invitational 2020. And it was such a perfect dovetail with everything that April does. I'm sorry that there are other projects that I can't talk about, but I thought that we had this incredible opportunity. And so in terms of this conversation, I feel like April, for the Renwick Invitational, we usually select 4 artists, and you are my honorary 5th artist for today for the show. So the Renwick Invitational series began in 2000 to showcase emerging and mid-career craft artists that were deserving of broader national attention, and it's since grown into a biennial celebration that usually features 4 artists. Those are hand-selected by a panel of experts, and this year I was joined on that panel by Emily Zilber and Stefano Catalani, who some of you may know, and then Emily Zilber helped guest curate the exhibition. And of course, we not only select artists to participate, but we also like to have at least a loose theme that we can gather those ideas around to keep the exhibition coherent. And in the last few years, particularly before COVID, I think the environment was heavily on everybody's minds. And of course, the environment, especially these days, is inherently political, but I think we also felt a very human desire to maybe get away from the whirlwind of news and politics that was surrounding us. As you can imagine, this show was 2020, so we were curating this in 2018 and thereabouts. And we wanted to escape the hustle of the urban life around us, and we were thinking about this show in connection to using nature to find solace and an actual connection and continuity in the natural world. So we selected 4 artists: Roland Ricketts, Lauren Fensterstock, Deborah Moore, and Timothy Horn for this year's exhibition. And our theme, Forces of Nature, really became a way to think about the world around us and our part in it and our responsibility to it through the eyes of these artists. And craft actually felt like an unusually ideal vehicle for that conversation, since craft is so intrinsically tied to nature and its cycles when you think of its material qualities, from harvesting grasses to create a basket to turning sand into glass. It's literally the medium is the message here. I think these 4 artists, as April does, also capture some of the mystery and the beauty of nature. So the work in this exhibition is massive, and it's beautiful, and it really engulfs people in its presence. But I think it also serves to heighten people's awareness of ecological concerns. So I thought I would just give you a quick, brief tour of the exhibition, sort of start to finish, since we can't do this in our galleries right now. The museum is closed indefinitely, but we have extended the show a few months until midsummer. Hopefully you'll be able to see it in person. And then I thought April and I could talk a little bit about her work in the context of some of these same ideas. So this is a work by an artist named Roland Ricketts, and this piece is called I Know Kashiki. It was originally developed in 2018 in the Tokushima Prefecture of Japan. Roland is an artist who works with indigo. He owns a farm in Indiana where he actually has 6 acres, and he works indigo from seed to end result. So you would think of him as maybe instead of a farm to table cook, he is a farm to gallery artist. And his work involves every single aspect of this idea of the production of indigo. He was heavily influenced by a trip to Japan, and the first time he encountered an indigo farm and had never thought about the process that you go through to create this dye, which is essentially a color, an ephemeral thing that has so much labor and cycles involved in it. So in these large-scale installations, he brings a lot of the labor and the life of the indigo throughout the piece. So you see speakers around the edges of the room, and those have a sound element that was drawn from the harvesting of the indigo, and so on and so forth. I Know Kashiki roughly translates as a love of Kashiki, which is a Japanese philosophical concept of landscape or scenery, and it's often applied to ceramics. And it centers around an idea that landscape can't be captured in a single moment or image, but instead it has to be understood through an interaction between human interventions and the natural. So the fading and the bright blue indigo isn't necessarily the destruction of the inherent color or the original color or its loss, but it speaks to some of the cycles found in nature and how things inherently change over time. So there's this real beauty to this installation that I thought was almost the ideal way to open an exhibition like this. It's incredibly immersive. It asks you to look at these tiny little details. Here's a detail of some of those pieces. So each one of these individual indigo sheets that have been brought together in this installation, there are 450 of these sheets, and they were given to individual participants all over Japan and throughout the world who were asked to live with this indigo for a period of time. So I will show you, these are the indigo boxes that you see as they actually are translated. If you look back here in the speakers around the wall, they have been recycled onto the walls. And participants were asked to live with these. And so they were actually placed in their homes to sort of view what was happening with those participants. So you understand, you become attuned to the different exposures and think about what was happening in those places that the cloth was actually absorbing with every sunrise and sunset. And I think there's something really beautiful about that when we come into this era of COVID, where we're really thinking about these daily cycles. And then as you move through into the next gallery, you encounter the work of Lauren Fensterstock. And I was interested, Katya, I didn't know that Lauren and April were honored at the same time. That's a wonderful connection. And Lauren is traditionally, she came out of a jewelry background. She actually graduated from SUNY New Paltz. She studied with folks like Jamie Bennett and Myra Mimlich Gray and Lisa Gralnick. And I think you see a lot of that in her work, but like many other jewelers and artists today, she has now been translating that into the sculptural realm in these massive scale installations. And this was a piece that she created specifically for Renwick. It is mosaicked, it's covered in Swarovski crystals, so it just breathes in the gallery with these beautiful glinting lights. And this was a slight departure from the work that she had been doing prior. She had moved from work that was really all about the garden, and it was about man's relationship and the way that we place our sort of philosophical ideas into our gardening aesthetics, the way that we try to manipulate nature, seeing it that way. And she moved into considering this from a more holistic standpoint, moving out of the garden and into this cosmic realm. So this piece is based on a 14th century manuscript called the Book of Miracles. And that book was about the cosmic relationships of mankind's actions. It came out, it was a response to people's increased interest in reading the Bible. And this was all about elements going on in our cosmic world brought about by human conditions and brought about by human actions. So she was thinking about this holistic cycle between man and the heavens and how we translate that. And this is the wonderful illustration that she made for the piece that she ended up creating in the galleries. And here are a couple of really phenomenal installation shots. So you get a view of all of the detail going into that. Of course, these are done in the signature palette that she uses, which is a monochromatic black. And that, of course, has many influences in 20th century minimalism. But here she's also using it as a reference to the Claude glass, named after Claude Lorraine, which was a device used to paint for artists in gardens, and also a reference to scrying glasses, black glasses of prophecy. So it's really interesting that this work was actually begun before COVID, and over time it started to sort of transform in her mind, and this comet began to look a lot like a COVID molecule. So it became certainly more ominous than it had been before. But moving on into the following gallery, you encounter the work of Deborah Moore. And many of you are glassies, so probably many of you know Deborah Moore. She's a Northwest glass artist who's been working since the 1980s. She was part of Dale Chihuly's glass blowing team out at Pilchuck. And for more than 20 years, Deborah has been working in the Seoul area of the orchid. She has created gorgeous works like this one she's been focusing in on. And April, I think that Deborah might actually give you a run for your money in going to the most remote places in the world to study glass. She too has been to Antarctica and all sorts of places, and she translates these not directly from the flower, but really sort of her own emotional lens to give people the impression of these things in a more intuitive way. So she draws these on her sketchbook and then comes back and reinterprets them in colors that are different from nature but relevant to it, to give it a more of emotional sense. And Deborah's work really revolves around having an emotional connection to these flowers and really creating something that's profoundly beautiful that you can have a relationship with. And I think that's a very important part of this. So this new body of work increased in scale and took a totally different turn. And although the Renwick Invitational is usually an area where we focus in on emerging artists, it does have that mid-career category that we couldn't resist bringing Deborah into the exhibition because of this massive leap into these stunning trees, which she created for the opening of the Benaroya wing at Tacoma Art Museum just a couple of years ago. And it's a series of 4 trees, and I will show you all 4. This is wisteria and magnolia. And these are growing out of real rocks. So she went to the quarry and first selected the rocks, and then she built these gorgeous gravity-defying trees coming right out of those. And so these 4 sort of roughly relate to the seasons. So again, to this idea of cyclical time. But they also, to me, have a really interesting relationship to her earlier work, because instead of being all about the sort of abundance and sensuality of the orchid, these are more about the beauty of age and have this bonsai quality to them, that they have been bent and formed by the elements. And that is something that makes them incredibly beautiful. And then finally, the last artist that we selected for the exhibition is Timothy Horn. Timothy is a native of Melbourne, Australia. He moved to the US in 2002 when a scholarship brought him to the Massachusetts College of Art and Design. And he was trained in both sculpture and glass. And these works, which open up the gallery, were actually inspired when he went back to Australia after being in the US for some time to show his partner the coral reefs, and found them somewhat devastated. And so his work is sort of baroquely beautiful in an over-the-top way that appeals to the senses, but it has this underlying current of concern for the environment and for what mankind is doing to the environment around it. So here's a gorgeous close-up of one of Timothy's pieces, and he takes his influence from both the drawings of Haeckel and historic jewelry. So you can see this combination of the beauty and structure and natural resilience of nature alongside the artifice of humanity. And so they're really quite striking. And then this other work in the gallery, which is some of the work that he did for the De Young Museum several years ago. And this was in rock sugar, this grand carriage. And so again, it's almost as though these natural structures are literally growing in the galleries. And so those are the pieces that are in the exhibition that I wanted to sort of open up so we could have a little conversation about your work, April, and kind of relation to some of these that gave me a lot of ideas to talk about. Hi, April.
Hey.
I wanted you to indulge me. I think I did talk to you a little bit about this earlier, but I wanted to go through this sort of just straight through the exhibition in a way, because when I was thinking about talking to you about your work, the themes that each one of these artists talks about also relate in such an interesting way to your work. So I thought, you know, as I was looking at Roland Ricketts' work, Roland's work is such a meditation on time and thinking deeply about that. What I find so interesting in some ways about your work is these various segments of time that you're working with. You're working with the photographic image, which is this ephemeral moment that you are taking. And then you're working again with the time that it takes to actually produce one of these glass pieces, which is a long period of time when you're working over the glass. And then finally, you also incorporate this sort of geologic time and the actual time it takes for climate to change. And I wanted to know how you feel time works in your work, and how the sort of stoppage of time and continuation plays into your narratives.
for me, I'm always asking myself, why am I engraving? And a big part of that has to do with, like, I feel like in the 21st century, we're moving so quickly that we don't have that much time to kind of step back and slow down. And one thing that I love about the process of engraving is that, well, I can do it for a lifetime and still not be a master. So there's still always something to learn, but it provides me the space and the time to be kind of just connected with the things that I've learned and translating an image. And I I think that comes through in the work. I think the time and the hand quality of my work, I think that comes through in the final engraving. So I think time is a really important aspect of my process. I'm not a very prolific artist for sure because of the time.
How long does one of these take for you to complete?
They take a while. It's kind of like watching paint dry or sand very slowly. So it takes, developing the work takes a long time, and then getting the glass panels takes a few days to just time in the kiln, and then engraving, a small piece would take a couple days, but I have larger pieces that, take a month or two to engrave. So I generally like to work on multiple pieces at a time. And I find that when I work on a lot of bigger work, I like to work on a lot of smaller work that I can make a lot faster. And then, when I get tired of that, move back to the larger pieces.
It seems like it must be very satisfying, actually, to be out and to do the photography, which is immediate, and then do this. Except, do you still work in pinhole photography? So that's even a different element of time.
Yeah, I definitely, I get a little bit, if I'm only doing one thing, I have a hard time doing that. But the pinhole photography, I'm still exploring. There's a couple of different types of pinhole photography that I've been doing. And one type is a super long exposure pinhole photography that I learned by a Seattle artist named Janet Newhouser. You're actually exposing film paper, and you don't really capture anything except the moving light. And I made my work based on Antarctica was based on a lot of those pinhole photos. Nice. And then I also have a camera called a zero image camera that's a traditional kind of pinhole camera. You can capture more than just light on that.
So I also think one of the things that I love about Lauren Fensterstock's work, and what I love also about this work, is the immense amount of research that goes into everything that you do, and the sort of geekiness involved in it, if you don't mind me saying, that you go down these rabbit holes and you fall in love with the science of it, and it gives you a whole different idea about the world. And it seems that this project is part of that same direction. I love the way that the work has progressed from what were street scenes into the environment, and now the street scenes and the environment are coming together. And you and I talked about this idea of social ecology, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, social ecology it's something that I have just learned about, I guess, in the last year. It's a philosophy that embraces democracy and ideas, and always transforming. And for me, it's something that I'm still learning about, but that I've been really inspired by, just kind of learning, going down the rabbit holes of, like you said, of discovering new ideas. And that's kind of going back to what Katya talked about earlier with Jiří Hartsuba. Jiří was a perpetual student of life, and he believed that you never stop learning. And he really definitely had a profound impact on me, and that urge to always want to learn about something new. So when I hear something that's interesting, I'll sometimes listen to podcasts when I'm engraving. If I hear something, I like to go learn more about it. But that idea of being a student of life has been really important to me.
And do you see yourself continuing down this path? The newest work sort of brings it full circle into the cities. And do you have, projects coming up where you'll be traveling on any other expeditions theoretically, or will there be more ski work?
I'm thinking a lot about that now. I think COVID has made me readjust things a little bit, obviously, like everybody. So not so much field work, but I have an embarrassing amount of photographs on my 10 different hard drives, and I'm realizing I have a lot of content. So I'm kind of in this moment of wanting to look at some older imagery that I found interesting, but definitely moving forward on talking about climate and human interaction. This work I see at Heller right now is kind of a unique moment of really documenting 2020 and that change and that transformation that we're in, and who knows where we're going to go.
I'm just curious, April. So and Nora, I guess in your work, because you've worked so much with photography and then with engraving, I'm just going to point to that screen behind you, which is actually the direct material result of your research work also in some ways. Can you maybe talk about how all those things are connected? Because in some ways, I think social ecology question goes in a way to that also.
So behind me is a screen that I made of marine debris. They're disposable lighters that I found on the beach when I was working from Pearl and Hermes Atoll. So in 2016, I had not really a residency. I was working with the Hawaiian monk seal research program from Pearl and Hermes Atoll. And it's a remote atoll about 1,200 miles from Honolulu, literally in the middle of the ocean. And it's basically the North Pacific garbage gyre is washing, a lot of the debris gets washed on these tiny islands and atolls. And I lived on this island with 2 other women for about 4.5 months, and we were studying in the Hawaiian monk seal.
Describe how large the island is.
The island we lived on was 10 feet above sea level, and no trees or anything like that. And it was about 35 acres. And yeah, it was about 35 acres. I'm trying to remember how big that island was, but they're tiny. The entire atoll was quite huge. It was 450 square miles, but there's only about 100 acres above sea level. So it's tiny, super tiny, but they're absolutely covered in debris. And when I was working there, I just, we'd see these ubiquitous items, and actually every single piece of marine debris that we saw was something recognizable. So I started picking up these disposable lighters. My teammates started picking up these lighters, and then we had other biologists from the other islands in the Hawaiian archipelago pick up disposable lighters. And ultimately I have about in the installation that is 4,480 disposable lighters that were found as marine debris. And this piece to me really is a visual representation of our individual impact that we have on the environment. We feel like our individual actions don't matter, but when you consider that we have 7.9 billion people on the planet, all of a sudden our actions aren't as small as they are. So I view this also as an archival record of our existence, just like the engravings, because of course, every single piece of plastic that has ever been made is still with us. And when we throw stuff away, away is not really, we have to think about where that is. So that's what that piece was to me.
So that was a perfect segue, Katja, because someone mentioned in the chat that they were obsessed with that piece. I also am obsessed with that piece, April. It's just amazing. And it also brings up, and maybe this is the last question since I want to be cognizant of time to let other people ask questions, but The idea of beauty and hope in your work, which you and I also talked a little bit about, because glass has this inherent beauty to it, and work like that is both sort of horrifying, but also breathtakingly beautiful. And I think that's some of the effect. Can you talk about beauty in your work and hope?
The beauty and the hope is really important to me. I am very aware that climate change is absolutely terrifying, and I don't want to bring that part into the work. I want, where people aren't very productive when they're scared, but they are productive when they're inspired. So the idea of having something beautiful yet terrifying is, hopefully there's that dichotomy that can lead to more inspiration than fear. I don't think fear is very productive. And I remember when I was first really learning about climate change, I heard all these like terrifying and scary statistics, and it froze me. So the beauty is definitely important.
And it comes through in your work, which I think ultimately is incredibly hopeful and beautiful. So the first question that actually came in was for Nora, and it's kind of a not necessarily directly April-related question, and probably could be a standalone lecture, but I'm just going to let you do it in a kind of a summary of the 101. And that's, Nora, you used the words art and craft on a few occasions. Please tell us, what is the difference between them?
What is the difference between art and craft? That's the age-old question.
I know.
Like the question about pornography. I don't know, but I know it when I see it. For me, art and craft, I mean, they're dovetailing concepts, and there's a lot of overlap between them. And I think personally of art and craft as lenses through which we view a lot of activity. And there are things that are obviously, craft actually is being about materials and about process and about skill at its core, and about functional objects, and art being about communicating ideas. But there's so much overlap between those two things. And I have the luxury at Renwick that I have a museum that is devoted to craft in its own building, but is part of the Smithsonian American Art Museum. So we can sort of take for granted that these are two parts of the same beast. But if I show the same object at Renwick and then at Smithsonian American Art Museum, people view it in a very different way. And I love playing with that line personally. So, as we have a lot of, conversations about, if you bring it to the Renwick, then it's a conversation about how was it made and why was it made. And there's a lot of focus on process and the object. If you bring it over to Smithsonian American Art Museum, the focus shifts. And a lot of the time the focus is on the pedigree of the artist and the intellectual idea behind it. But neither one is exclusive. And I think more and more overlapping.
And I just want to say that I think that you, Nora, have also been extraordinary in making that line and showing us how that line is permeable and malleable. And that's really a gift, I think, and a gift to us. So the next question is for April from Judy Wolf, and it says, as you work on your pieces that take a long time to produce, do you try to temper or try to encourage the moods you bring on a day-to-day basis to your work?
I don't know that I think too much about that. It's such a slow process that it kind of, if I'm having a good day or a bad day, I don't know that it all comes out in the work. I know when I'm doing something like drawing or writing that's more immediate, it definitely comes out. But I don't know. I don't know how time tempers my work, to be honest. I think it does. I think the process allows for that, but.
And I think, and try to encourage the moods you bring on a day-to-day basis. I guess, does that mean your hand is lighter one day and not as light the other?
Probably. Some days I'm definitely more focused on the rougher cutting, which is removing large amounts of material, and some days are the detail days. So.
actually a double question from Richard Whiteley. Was Richard one of your teachers, April?
Richard was one of my teachers in Australia. Yeah.
Okay, so here it goes again. Great talk. Your work still retains such a powerful quality of place. Do you feel that is still part of your thinking? And do you see this as a tool that helps connect people to the natural world?
Absolutely. Like I said, I think this work is a little bit of an anomaly, that it's really talking about the human condition, humanity, but in general, yes, I think that that connection is really important in what I'm trying to accomplish. I think if we can be connected to something through art, that we're moving forward and hopefully a positive way. So definitely think that that connection is really important with my work.
Nora, and I have a question for you. So do you guys have any estimate as to when the museum might reopen?
Oh, Katya, I wish we did. We don't have an estimate yet. We're really playing it by ear and trying to be cautious and appropriate. We don't want to have another incident of closing down, but I think we're definitely on an upswing. So I hope that we are going to hear in the next few weeks. I do hope that we will be open by sometime in spring, and the current show will be up through sometime in summer. I think.
So the current show is the Invitational?
Yes, and then we're going to be opening the New Glass Now show that Corning put together in October, which will be another exciting opportunity.
Fantastic.
Yes.
And when will that go up? Do we know?
I don't know the specific date off the top of my head. I think it's October 22nd. It is October at some point.
Okay, October. Mark your calendars, everyone.
The funny thing about COVID in one way is that the current exhibitions in some ways are getting more documented than anything that we have done before, as Katya, you've probably found as well. And so we have some great programs that are going online, virtual programs, and you can find all of those on Smithsonian American Art Museum website. And we have some recorded programs with the artists. So please check it out.
We have one more question, which we're going to take for April. Barbara Rubel. Cameo work creates sharp images. Yours is more impressionistic. How does that factor into your intent, April?
I guess some of my work is pretty realistic looking, but that softness does kind of go to that ephemeral quality where I think it creates more of a connection, and I think it lets people use their own kind of experiences and imagination to fill in the gaps. So a lot of the places that I've been documenting are places that not everybody will get a chance to go to or experience. So hopefully it makes it a little bit more accessible for people. It's definitely a pretty big factor into my work. And also when I very first started learning engraving, Yerji told me I asked Yerji about, and how do I do that, Yerji? And he looked at me with a grin on his face and he said, avoid the details, April. And he later joked that he thought that was a terribly mean answer to his question instead of helping me try to figure it out. But it's something that I carry with me every single piece I make. I think, just avoid the details. So I've got Yerji.
I want to say thank you to everyone who has been with us this hour. Thank you, April. Thank you, Nora, so much. It is such a pleasure to speak to all these accomplished women artists, curators. So it's just a privilege to be here. Anyway, thank you very much, everybody, and have a good night.